What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 55, and I am the host, Kyle Lanslone. Today, I have Connor Freeman joining me on the show again. He's a writer at the Libertarian Institute and a previous guest on the show. I'll be sure to link to that episode in the show notes page. I think our first plan for today's show was talk mostly about potential regime change in Iran, but after yesterday and all the talk about a coup in the United States, I guess we got to start there on today's show. So we'll have a big show today. A lot of big topics to talk about. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. First, I just want to mention to people to check out the sponsor of our show, or my show, Paloma Verde. PalomaVerdeStore.com is the website to go to. There you could get all kinds of CBD projects, soft gels, gummies, extracts, anything you can imagine. Could help you sleep better, can help you, just avoid some muscle pain, help with headaches, all kinds of benefits, anxiety, stuff like that. So go to the PalomaVerdeStore.com. If you already use your CBD products, think about getting them there. They're high quality and lab tested. If not, you check out their education page and see how CBD products could help you. So again, PalomaVerdeStore.com, and be sure to use the promo code PEACE for a discount and to let them know you came from this podcast. All right, Connor, let's get into what happened yesterday. I guess I put together some notes of a little rundown I wanted to give of what I kind of feel like unfolded yesterday from just trying to watch on Twitter and factor in the independent media sources like Matt Blumenthal and Ford Fisher were down there on the ground and they recorded some video. Of course, there are plenty of people within the Trump supporter crowd that have video on, and then there was like the mainstream media that also had various video, and it has since gotten access to the Capitol so we could see some of the damage that was done and stuff like that. Yesterday morning starts off with Congress holding their, I guess, procedural. It's more like a ceremonial thing. You know what I mean? Like they use the same old boxes that they've used forever. In the past, this is like covered kind of like a royal wedding or something like that. They talk about all the congressmen there, and it's like it's an event. But this year, the Republicans were planning on, using some of the procedural motions that are available to extend this and to argue that some of the election results in various states were incorrect, including Arizona and Pennsylvania. Although I'm not even sure they were going to really argue that there were enough fraudulent states to overturn the election. I mean, Arizona and Pennsylvania alone wouldn't have been enough to do that. At the same time, Trump was holding a rally, I believe at the White House or outside of the White House, and it was a general Stop the Steal rally. And I believe he called on his supporters to march to the Capitol building. He didn't say, go sat the Capitol building, go break into it, but he called for his supporters to march down to the Capitol building. There they confronted some barricades of police, and there's definitely one video of the police just removing the barricades and letting them go by, but there's more video of like kind of the police and the protesters tuffling over the barricades with the protesters, in some cases being able to push their way through. They then go and start to break through a couple entrances into the Capitol building. It looked like they broke the glass out of one door by the Senate chambers and then were able to open it and get in. And then there also seemed to be video of them breaking a window and entering through there. I didn't see a whole lot of, I'm not sure, Connor, if you saw like maybe they broke down like 10 doors, but it looked to me like there was only a couple places they were coming in. And that in most of the cases they were able to like just break some glass and get in. I didn't see them like have to like beat up a bunch of cops to get in. And that was one of the interesting things, really up until this point and a while after, is you don't see a huge police presence down at the Capitol. So I don't know, anything up until that point that you'd like to add, or I'm missing details of what's going on here?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on again. Really appreciate it. And I would just say, well, no, from what I saw, actually, a lot of the footage that I saw, just from reading, like for instance, Caitlin Johnstone put out a piece last night, and she was showing footage, and I'd seen a lot on Twitter where it looked like, yeah, the police presence was pretty light, and in many cases they even there's a video that got like went viral on Twitter where the cops literally, I think the basically the tweet is just saying they opened the effing gates, and it shows the cops literally removing this very weak kind of barricade that's like 4 feet high, and you could just knock it over if you wanted to, but they just sort of remove it, and then the riot, well, they're not, I mean, whatever, the Trump supporters start moving ahead, and they started marching on the Capitol. Yeah, it didn't seem like there was much resistance, until they got to the point where, obviously the woman was shot, um, the woman who died. But yeah, I mean, it looked like they got in there, and it just went kind of haywire. And yeah, I didn't see, it didn't seem, it wasn't like what you would have, nothing like what we would have expected. I would have expected that if somebody attempted something like that, not that I would want it to go this way necessarily, but like, of course, but you would imagine that there would have been like heavy reaction, and that a lot of people would have died.
Right.
Or yeah.
I was kind of surprised that people weren't shot before they got into the, like, broke down the, you know what I mean, when they're trying to go through the windows and stuff like that. That's kind of when I expected police to escalate to some kind of like higher level of violence. One thing that somebody had pointed out was the possibility that they didn't have enough police there, just either because of mismanagement or because they were evacuating so many high level people from the vice president, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and then I think they also like prioritize evacuating some other high level congressional members, and so maybe it was just too many cops went with them. The other thing I'll say is that when you look at the police officers that are there at the beginning, they're not really riot police officers. They're just regular cops. You know what I mean? They're in uniform. They have a mask on, but they don't have a riot shield on. They don't have automatic rifles. That some of them look like they just have batons. Other ones have a 9mm sidearm. I guess in one sense, for all these cops there, people are talking about, and I want to talk about this after in a minute, the treatment of these protesters, or whatever you want to call them, versus like Black Lives Matter. That that's getting a lot of attention, but there simply wasn't enough cops there to have violently put down the, like, if it was going to get really violent, there wasn't enough cops with enough ammunition there, right? At least at that point. I mean, later on when they shoot that woman, then that's definitely the case. But so that was one thing that I noticed, I guess.
It Well, it
Then
looked like, well, I was just gonna say, it looked like, yeah, there were like three different kinds of, from the footage I saw, there were like three different kinds of law enforcement there. There were like the regular everyday cops we were just talking about with the 9mm and the batons, and then there were the Capitol Police, who were the ones who shot. Looks like they were the ones who shot the lady in the inside. But they were like dressed up in like suit. Well, in like, they look like almost like Secret Service guys. They were
uh,
Capitol Police.
okay.
Well, is that who you
No,
saw? Or I
I
mean,
thought you were talking about the guys who looked like they're commandos in Afghanistan.
right? No, exactly. I was going to say that was the third group that I saw.
Yeah.
Uh, they were, now it looked like from what I saw that they were the ones that were escorting, like the Senate and the leadership and Pence.
Okay.
And then I didn't, I mean, if they're the ones that came in, from the video I saw of the lady getting shot, I thought I saw the guys in the suits. But maybe I'm wrong.
I
Maybe I'm
thought
wrong.
I saw one of the commando guys behind them that actually shot that lady,
Okay,
but
that's yeah, because then there were guys behind the actual protesters who had like assault rifles
right. I thought that's who
adjacent to the
shot that lady.
protesters.
Yeah, so this lady gets shot, and then Congress actually, I believe, shuts down the whole, um, like session they have, and suspends it for a few hours, the people actually get into one, either the House or the Senate chamber, and there's this picture of this guy like with a buffalo on his head or something,
Right.
flexing up there. There's some guy pictured at Nancy Pelosi's desk and took a picture of her mail. But overall, when I saw this morning that they had some, and this was meant to be like from CNN, like, oh my God, the damage at the Capitol. I didn't see anything that looked like anybody had tried to set a fire.
Right.
I saw somebody walking out of there with like a podium, so I'm guessing that like some things were stolen, but I didn't see any like desecration of like the famous pictures that are there. I saw one piece of broken furniture. Again, somebody stole Nancy Pelosi's mail and left like a mean note at her desk. But then, like, all of her post-it notes were like still on her computer. Like, nobody threw her file. Like, there's papers on her desk, and they look relatively orderly. It doesn't look like somebody like threw all of her papers all over or anything like that. And so, it was interesting what these people were in there to do. It seemed like mostly just have fun. Like they were like kind of tourists
Yeah.
on like a wild
Right.
thing there. I mean, they did shut down this procedural thing from happening for a few hours, but then they left. They didn't occupy it.
Did
From
they
what
leave shortly after Trump put out those tweets saying like, "All right, everybody, you got to be peaceful. We got to leave. We don't want this to." Moon of Alabama wrote a piece last night that actually cited the things that Trump was saying that got deleted from Twitter, and they were very mild and reasonable. Actually, I mean, you wouldn't think he's not inciting anything. He essentially was basically trying to calm the situation down while still saying that I understand you're upset. I'm upset too. The election was stolen and this sort of thing. But that's not. I mean, that's not. People say that all the time. Like more than half the country feels that way.
Right. Well, that was one of the things I wanted to bring up about all of this is both Facebook and Twitter. I had the tweet up here from MSNBC saying Twitter says 3 tweets today from President Trump have been removed, and his account will be locked for 12 hours following the removal of these tweets. If the tweets are not removed, the account will remain locked. And so this is, I believe, one of these things I've heard of other people writing into this where Twitter tells you have to remove your tweets or else your account won't be unlocked. But they don't actually remove the tweets themselves. Nobody could see them right now, but you're the one that has to delete them. I thought this was absurd
Hmm.
that Twitter has let Donald Trump say the election has been rigged for months, right? At
Right.
least months. And all the they put all these tags and everything on it and stuff like that. But today, after when Trump also includes "be peaceful, go home and be peaceful" in those tweets, those are the ones that they decide go too far and to block. You know, Twitter
That
kept
is
the
very
stupid
weird. It's
message on the
you know
bottom. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was just gonna say that is extremely weird because it's like those are the ones you. Well, it's almost like they're trying to make it look like he was being more aggressive than he was. Because if you read it, I can just say I have the article pulled up from Moon of Alabama's blog. If you want, I can read off some of the things that were said.
Yeah,
So he says protesters who were seen fighting with officers both inside the building were described as well. It says I guess he's quoting. Let's see. So in the video address, he said, "I know your pain. I know you're hurt." He urges them to go home because I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election. Everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. He described it as a tough period of time and repeated. This is from a PC citing and repeated false claims that November's election was quote fraudulent. He ended the video message by calling protesters very special, adding, "We can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special." And then Twitter disabled that video, his address, from being liked or retweeted due to a risk of violence,
yes.
which is bizarre.
And I suspect that's one of the 3 tweets that they want him to remove. along with the next one that he sent out, which, said that the election was stolen from them, but to go home and be peaceful. Which is interesting because you would think that they would want to amplify those tweets because Trump is calling for his supporters not to
Yeah.
be violent.
Yeah, he's
And
trying to de-escalate the situation.
right. And they're essentially, kind of committing to the opposite. So that was a little absurd. I thought. Facebook also, adds Trump for 24 hours, and I guess these things I'm guessing are going to become permanent. I don't imagine that they're going to really walk this back. I'm always opposed, I think, to removing and getting rid of tweets from any kind of political leader just because I think that we should see what they're saying. I guess, maybe if it's a direct call to violence, like if he had said like go string up Nancy Pelosi, like that's a different story. But that's not what he was actually saying. The opposite, which is go
Right.
home and be peaceful. And then it seemed like things really de-escalated after that. One of the things that is still somewhat unknown is the total like kind of level of violence for this whole event. In one sense, it seems like there wasn't a whole lot of violence. I haven't seen any reports of severely injured police officers, any police officers that were shot or hit with any violent weapons. The one person who was shot and killed was shot by police, and it looked like a very bad shoot to me. I mean, they shot this lady in the back of the neck. Maybe she was like trying to enter a different section of the Capitol building, but I don't know. It seems like it seems very odd to me that they decided to shoot this lady then when they've let all these other people run around, especially when there was so much law enforcement close by. It seemed like she was somebody who would have been able to apprehend. Her name is Ashley Babbitt. She's apparently a 14-year veteran of the U.S. Air Force and had served 4 tours of duty. So, I'm interested in what her motives were for supporting Trump so much. And it's sad that she ends up dead. There's also 3 people they say who died of medical emergencies. It's completely unclear as to what this is, if these people died because maybe they were trampled or squashed in some way. Maybe 3 people had heart attacks yesterday. I wouldn't be completely surprised, I guess. I mean, this was one of the older crowds of protesters that I have seen. So
Yeah.
I guess that's possible. Being out in the cold all day, I don't know
Their
what.
hearts are probably racing. I mean, it's like for some of those people, it looked like they were having the greatest day of their life, but it's also, going to be a very stressful situation.
That's true. Police deployed a lot of like flashbangs and tear gas, and so if you are unhealthy, those could certainly be things that further escalate your
Yeah.
heart rate, could cause a heart attack or some kind of medical, asthma attack type of emergency. So hopefully we get more details on that and figure out, kind of there. One of the I guess questions I had for you, Connor, and one of the things I had, really tried to think a lot about is what to call the Trump supporters. Was it a protest, a riot? People called it what, an insurrection, a coup, a mob. I kind of felt like something between protest and riot was appropriate. It
Yeah.
certainly wasn't a peaceful protest. Some people are calling it a mostly peaceful protest, and I guess that's for the most part true. Even most of the people who went to the Capitol building didn't seem to like really do anything violent or destroy anything. They were just there protesting. They did stop a session of Congress, which is unusual, but it's not uncommon for a bunch of left-wing protesters to shut down congressional offices for several hours with sit-ins and stuff like that.
Sure.
So, it
Chuck Schumer was pretty hyperbolic with what he was saying. He was I don't
really.
have all the quotes lined up. Yeah, still go figure. He was saying that they're domestic terrorists. Basically you better not call them protesters. These people are I think he was saying insurrectionists. he compared it to Pearl Harbor. Everything is Pearl Harbor. I know that now, but especially post Trump and post Russia and Russiagate. But yeah, I mean, just ridiculous. Truthfully speaking, they can call it whatever they want. The truth is, even if you include the three people that died of the medical emergencies, that casualty toll is actually the exact same. So the Rolling Stones held a free concert, an infamous free concert at Altamont Speedway in late 1969, and the Hells Angels were the security. And they killed a guy who pulled out a gun at the front of the stage, and they stabbed him in the neck a bunch of times. Anyway, I believe three other people died there of other unrelated causes. This is not. That was a crazy moment, a crazy event, but and so was this, but it's not what you would have expected at all. I mean, from the way that if you just looked at the quotes from say Chuck Schumer, and you had no other information, you would imagine that the ramifications and the fallout was drastically different.
Right.
I mean, they really went in there and made a huge mess of things, it seems like. And of course, every quote I've seen from political officials saying, a woman died and we mourn her. They're not mentioning that she was killed by a cop.
Right. Yeah,
And
no,
that's a
that
really
was
important point to point out, because to note, because if you just keep saying it like that, then everyone assumes. Well, I'm not saying that everyone assumes, but you could, and maybe that's what's intended. That they must have been killed by these crazy white supremacist rioters,
right.
these
Well, yeah,
insurrectionist
most of the
terrorists.
headlines that you see are one woman killed during violent Trump mob or something like that. It's not clear that she was a participant. And again, if you look at the video, and you do just get like a brief 30-second kind of snippet of what's going on there. And so I mean, who knows, maybe before that she was flashing her gun and screaming, "I'm gonna kill Pelosi" or something crazy like that, in which case it changes your feelings about them killing her a little bit. And who knows, maybe Nancy Pelosi's down the hall, she's looking at her and about to go at her like a ravenous zombie or something like that. However, the video that we do have definitely doesn't suggest that's the case.
Were they?
So,
It looked like they had chairs or something set up, some sort of a light barricade that looked
yeah.
like there was plastic partitioning it, and it looked like all she did was stand up or put her foot on something so she could elevate herself slightly higher than everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
and then immediately the guy at point blank range effectively shoots her in the neck.
Right. And again, it seemed like there were plenty.
And she's surrounded by, like you said, armed,
Right.
like,
That somebody could have yanked her down off of that chair. And
yeah.
who knows, maybe she hits her head on the railing on the way down and dies anyways. But it seems far less likely, and that was an unnecessary amount of lethal force that the police used there. Yeah, so again, I don't know exactly what the right term is. Mob seems somewhat right to
They
me.
weren't, yeah, they weren't I would, yeah. I mean, do we call every riot an insurrection, or like a coup? Because, yeah, I mean, of course, the most, I mean, it's what's so obvious to everybody and egregious is the disparity in the way that people have talked about the rhetoric over the course of the summer from especially people like Chuck Schumer or AOC versus what they're saying now. And so I can understand why people would be upset. And also, it's hard for us. Well, at least for me, just with where I come from politically, being an anarchist, libertarian, that it's like I think even Dave Smith was saying this last night. It's like it's quite a different thing for us if you run into like a storefront or somebody else's private property and you start, just burning things and attacking people, and then if you just went to a government building, particularly that one, and started, quote, desecrating the holy whatever, the temple of democracy.
Right.
It's not on the same par for us philosophically, and I think the damage was much less significant probably. I mean, I understand there's going to have to pick up a lot of papers that were knocked off desks, but I mean,
Yeah. Well,
the more concerning thing to me is that they shot somebody in the neck and let her bleed out. Well, not let her bleed out, but they killed her, right?
right. Yeah, I don't think she had much of a chance after they shot her.
Sure.
Um, Yeah, it just yeah, like whenever they burned down the police precinct in Minneapolis, that was something that like it's a government building. I really get
Right.
why you would do that. Especially you know since nobody ends up dying, you know they didn't leave like a bunch of people locked in their cells or something like that when they set it on fire, and versus like burning down and destroying the target. You know, one's a lot worse to me than the other one. You know, people get medication from Target. You know, they have
Sure.
pharmacies in there. People work there. That's their income. That's where you know people have a walking distance to go shopping. That you know they rely on those kind of stores, and so you know even that's like a less terrible than burning down a small business or something like that. But you know there is a difference for me between when they do this to government property and towards the government them versus private citizens. And you know fortunately I guess there wasn't like a huge counter protest movement that day, and so the you know these protesters are a lot of times bat the blue type guys, and so I don't think they had the same kind of confrontational nature with the police anyways.
Right.
And so
They were
I,
almost shocked when they started getting the one guy. I saw a clip of I guess this guy Baked Alaska, who's like associated with Nick Fuentes. He's like in there, I think in the Capitol, and he starts getting pushed by cops, and he's like, "Well, I'm not going to say like all the profanity and everything on the show, but he was like, it sounded like he was like really surprised, like because he's, you know, you're thinking like, yeah, you guys support, we support you, you're pushing me, you know."
right. Um, yeah, so let's see what else. Oh, I was gonna ask you what you thought of the police conduct. I thought Caitlin Johnstone had a pretty good tweet out this morning saying that what we see from here is that if police act, you know, more like this towards everyone, then, and, you know, not including them shooting that lady in the back of the neck, but their overall presence not being so
Right.
heavy, not firing off you know, rubber bullets at, you know, people's groins and crazy stuff like that, not hitting people in the head with tear gas canisters, not looking like stormtroopers. Maybe then that, you know, fuels less violence from the protesters as well. And I
Right.
felt like that was kind of the gist of her tweet, and I kind of feel the same way. I you know people say it's all a race issue. I think part of it too is that you know when the Black Lives Matter protesters are out there, even when it's a group of white kids, you know the police are more hostile, but you know their target is the police. It's not like they're protesting the people standing behind the police. They're protesting the police themselves, where in this case uh, these people usually I think see police as their allies. I'm sure there's a lot of law enforcement within the MAGA movement. You know, even the lady that we have identified as being shot was a 14-year veteran, and so you
Right.
know they're a part of
There
this.
were
Yeah, go
well,
ahead.
there were like, you know, so if you look at some of the protests, the sort of AstroTurf protests in Venezuela, and what we've seen in Hong Kong, which is also has a lot of U.S. involvement, of course, we saw again just weird little characteristics in this case. So I saw like a lot of they had were carrying some people were carrying like Israeli flags at the protests yesterday, and including flags of the Iranian monarchy, and and that guy who was wearing the buffalo suit, who everybody is well, it's kind of going viral that he is, I guess, an actor from Arizona who's been at protests before. There was a video that was circulating of him. Uh, he's yelling about how Venezuela, you can do this too. You can free your country from communism and globalism. We are setting the standard. You know, we are the model. And so it just it kind of you're I mean if not um if some of this isn't necessarily astroturf, they're certainly very right wing. So of course, like you're saying, yeah, these are definitely like back the blue types, and you know, Trump supporters. They're not. The demands were not. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen some of this anger coming from people who were upset over Trump's, um, you know, blowing off all of his promises to end wars. But this was essentially, you know, a very pro-Trump, pro at law and order, to borrow a phrase, protests. So what's interesting about what you were saying about and what Caitlin Johnstone was saying, if you kind of if you don't bring in all the IDF tactics like shooting people in the groin and shooting tear gas canisters at people's heads, and acting like stormtroopers, maybe that makes it easier to de-escalate the situation. I mean, maybe that's something we could learn from what happened yesterday.
Yeah. I guess the last point I had here is just kind of looking ahead of where we're going. There was an interesting tweet from Mike Tracy last night about how, these people went in, and it was called a coup, but it really wasn't. I mean, did
Yeah, they weren't
anybody?
overthrowing anything.
Right. I don't think anybody had the idea that this would stop Joe Biden from becoming president. Or if it was going to be overturned, it would have been overturned by like the motions of Cruz and Holly and all of those, not from the protesters. Nobody thought that occupying the Capitol building would it's not something in the America where like whoever occupies the Capitol building controls the country. The only people that I think assert that this is a coup are people who would actually take orders from Buffalo Man because he was standing in front of that room. But the rest of us know that's not the case. These people also weren't there to occupy it for very long. None of them looked like they had major weapons. I mean, I guess they could have been carrying sidearms. I thought maybe I saw a couple of rifles, but it's not like you had, militants showing up, securing different points of entry, looking to make sure that they control the Capitol building to somehow prevent this, procedural thing from going through when everybody knows they would just do it somewhere else anyways. It's not like there's some mystical powers that come from the Senate chambers, and that they can't hold votes, maybe not online, but certainly in alternative locations. And so in that sense, there's no way from that side that this was a coup. I mean, at most they delayed this procedural motion that doesn't have anything to do with anything for 2 weeks, for 6 hours. But in response, people are talking about impeaching Donald Trump and invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from power. So really, who's getting cooed here?
Right.
It's kind of interesting. Not that I actually think Donald Trump is going to be removed from power in these 2 weeks. Pelosi signaled today that she wasn't even going to hold a session of Congress until then, so he definitely won't be impeached. While the House Judiciary Committee, at least the Democrats on it, put out a statement calling for Trump or for Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. By the time that they figured out how to do that, the 2 weeks are going to be up, I would imagine. There's just not enough time. But at the same time, it does seem like there's more momentum to remove Donald Trump from office than Joe Biden from office following this
Right.
this event here.
Yeah, it's yeah, some coup. It really didn't pan out the way they thought. And I just don't think that was it. I think a lot of these people, once they got in there, were kind of blown away at their own ability to get in there, and then it was just kind of, I mean, I'm not trying to be too uh, you know, I guess I'm not trying to be patronizing, but the Trump supporters, the ones that I've met, like the real like actual MAGA types, they're not super they're not the kind of people who would do that. I mean, maybe some of the QAnon people who have kind of had their brains fried might do something crazy. I mean, I don't know. I've never taken an oath to Q, and that seems kind of that seems really crazy to me. But I don't I've really kind of I don't even really look into that stuff because it seems so just ridiculous. But I can imagine some of those people being out of their minds. But the Trump supporters that you meet, they're just really pissed off. They feel like it was stolen from them. I haven't really looked too much into the election stuff. It hasn't really interested me, but I'm sure, I assume that all these elections are manipulated, and so I don't begrudge anybody. And I'm sure, and I know a lot of very bright people that I respect have made some cogent arguments as to why they believe that there is some merit to these cases. And so I can understand people being really mad. Would have been really mad if Trump had won, and I'm really mad that Biden won. I always feel like I'm getting robbed by this government and by the executive branch. Um, and so I get it. But yeah, I don't think Buffalo Man is apparently an actor, and he seemed to be the guy who got the most attention in there. And I don't think he's got. It seems like he's got some other projects he's working on to really take over anything as far as the government goes.
Well, that's another thing is that a lot of these people weren't even wearing
He does
masks
voice acting.
or anything like that, and so they're easily identifiable, and I'm guessing are going to spend some time in jail.
Sure.
Even Secretary of State Pompeo, who's one of Trump's biggest supporters and is constantly trying to make Trump feel good about himself, is saying that the FBI needs to arrest these people and everything like that. The last point I just had to make was that Trump, I guess, has now said there will be a peaceful transition of power on the 20th. So that's what I expected all along to happen, is that he would complain as much as he will. And, he had said in the past that if the Electoral College voted, he would go along with that vote. And so I kind of, expected this to happen. And just some things that are important to remember because the rhetoric from the mainstream media is so insane is that, this wasn't an armed insurrection. Donald Trump told his people to bat down and then said he would concede. Those aren't things that fascist leaders do. Those aren't things that, coup plotters do. And to remember that while the election is something that, is obviously a very heated topic for the Trump supporters, that there's a lot of other things going on, that the country has been under lockdown for 9 months, that even though, there's several people like Nancy Pelosi who will shame and shame and shame people for wanting to open their businesses and live their lives, she'll be photographed at the beauty salon. And that's just, one representation of the many people who have acted like this. And I think not, kind of seeing everything that's happened in 2020 in context leading up to this moment. And also that's happened over the past 4 years. As far as it goes, these people didn't burn down any buildings. It wasn't the most peaceful protest that happened, and maybe protest isn't even the right word for what happened, but there's been a hell of a lot more violent riots in the U.S. in 2020. And
Oh, yeah.
so everything that's happened in the past year, put all that in context when you're judging this event, and don't pretend that everything was rainbows and sunshines and then suddenly people came and kicked down the door of this beautiful establishment, and that the people in that building haven't voted for things like the Iraq War and
Oh, yeah.
$1 trillion defense bills and crazy stuff like that. But we should probably get on and start hitting on some of this Iran stuff.
Sure.
What I think we want to start with the UAE and some of the arms sales, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last time we discussed a piece that I'd written about basically Trump's anti-war deceptions, kind of the whole anti-war facade. And one of the things I mentioned in there was his role in the Yemen genocidal war that was kicked off by Obama in March of 2015, backing and underwriting everything that the U.S., or rather that the Saudi and the UAE coalition has done there with intelligence support, military support, diplomatic support, logistical support. Hundreds of thousands of people have been dead. Tens of thousands of children starved to death deliberately. Probably about half of the 200. And by the way, that number is probably super conservative, the 233,000, because that's a year old now, that number. Or actually more than that, because it's from 2019. But regardless, there were these, as part of the plot to encircle Iran with enemies who are armed to the teeth with U.S. weapons, so-called peace deals made in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords with the UAE and Bahrain, and now extended to Morocco and Sudan. One of the things that came up with the UAE was, and what people are noticing, is that if you cut a deal with Israel with the U.S. Sort of managing it, you can get a lot of welfare in the form of massive arms deals. So the UAE was, I was going to say they're slated to get, but they've now, the deal has been, any resistance to it was voted down by the Imperial Senate, but they're receiving, I guess, 14,000 munitions and bombs, Reaper drones, F-35s, and so there was some resistance to it in the Senate, gladly. That basically people were saying, look, these guys are committing war crimes. They're involved in Libya. They're involved in Yemen. I mean, I don't know how much of this made it into. I'm not sure if it did at all, but there was certainly, people are very aware of the UAE's alliance with Al Qaeda on the ground there, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and the Islamic State, which, as Nasser Arabi points out, in Yemen, they're basically the same thing. He calls them Qaeda ISIS. And so uh, so there were votes held, and on the resolutions to block these arms sales. Actually, they were narrowly defeated. Let's see. So the drone. So there was a resolution that addressed the drone sale that failed, 46 to 50, and then another resolution that addressed the F-35 sale failed, 47 to 49. And the two articles I'm referring to are from Dave D. Camp at antiwar.com. One is called "The Republican Senate Leader Voices Support for Massive UAE Arms Sale." The other is "Resolutions to Block UAE Arms Sales Fail to Pass in Senate." And so what I thought was interesting, speaking of McConnell, who was, all high and mighty yesterday about, I'm not sure, well, it was either him or Schumer that said, but they had very similar kind of speeches, and a lot of the blue checks were really praising McConnell for what a great guy he is, and he really stood up for what was right yesterday, but, basically saying it's like a stain on our history and all this stuff. Well, I've got another one for you. He leaned on the Senate as Senate Majority Leader to not block these arms sales. And so his quote is, "It's a little baffling to suggest that now, of all times, a protest gesture with no chance of obtaining a veto-proof majority is a valuable use of the Senate's time. But above and beyond that," and this is what I think is really interesting, he goes, "the strategic realities dictate that Congress should not stand in the way of this sale." Well, the strategic realities don't dictate anything other than the fact that we shouldn't be committing a genocide in Yemen. As Major Danny Surgeon, who writes for antiwar.com, former West Point professor, an author, has said, look, and also it's even in foreign affairs too, going back years. The Houthis are the enemies of ISIS and Al Qaeda. They have a local they have local interests. They're not international terrorists. They're fighting for their own land there, which the North Yemen was ruled for 1,000 years by the Houthis, going back until I think the 60s. And and as Danny Surgeon pointed out, if any blowback comes from this, it'll be from, well, actually AQAP has tried to carry out terrorist attacks against the U.S. 3 times. I think they nearly succeeded twice. And but Danny Surgeon has said that if there's an attack on the U.S., it's not coming from the Houthi. As a result of all this, it's not coming from the Houthis. It's coming from Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And so what's also interesting is Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, came in and said he's very comfortable with the UAE arms deal, and we strongly believe this agreement, this arms package, will not violate the U.S. commitment to maintain Israel's qualitative military edge, which is a policy for the U.S. to make sure that Israel, the apartheid state, can dominate all the other regional actors so it can continue its annexation policy and the settlements and bomb Syria without any resistance. And so also the spokesman, I won't get into their quote, but it's also very similar about the QME not being affected and how they support the arms deal. The AIPAC spokesman came out and said the same thing. And so what I want to talk to you about is I think Biden has promised that he will stop in Democratic debates. He said he'll stop selling weapons to the Saudis and treat them like, quote, the pariah they are, and make them pay a price. And I'll just say, I mean, that's Israel's man in Washington, so I don't know if he'll be able to pull that off. I mean, he's going to face resistance from the Israel lobby too.
Right. Well, did you want to talk about some of the resistance that Trump faced? I know we had this great Gareth Porter article from the Gray Zone on Pompeo and Netanyahu paved the path for war with Iran, and they're pushing Trump again. So did you want to talk about some of that?
Sure. So Gareth wrote a piece in March of 2020 um, basically kind of predicting and by showing what had led up to the Soleimani assassination throughout 2019, and well, that was on January 3rd, 2020, but showing what all led up to that. And it's very interesting because he calls it the tripwire strategy, and it mirrors what we're seeing now with ostensibly with Trump sort of in charge of it, even though he's handed off the policy to Gina Haspel and Pompeo and Elliot Abrams. But so so what happened was one of the elements of it was that you're referring to is Trump wanted to. It sounds like he wanted to. I guess in August, this was being just let me go confirm that really quick. So he was so Macron, from France, was trying to get a deal going. Well, get Rouhani and Trump to start talking with each other, and this really would be a problem for Netanyahu's strategy with Pompeo and John Bolton. And Pompeo likely told Netanyahu what was going on. So Netanyahu really started stepping up his bombings of Iranian-backed Iraqi militias, as well as even Hezbollah in southern Beirut, bombing their headquarters and blowing out with a drone strike and blowing the windows out of their media offices. And yeah, he was apparently really complaining about this to his security cabinet on, I guess, the 24th. So the bombing took place on the 25th, and Macron revealed what he was trying to do on the 26th. But after those bombings, it really kind of threw a wrench into the whole scheme. So it wasn't able to go through. And then they continued with the escalations there, that continuing attacks on Iran-backed Iraqi militias. This created a response between where the Iraqis started firing missiles at they've been accused of this. I mean, we don't know exactly who fired that rocket in the green zone I guess it was like December 20th of last year.
Right.
But they've suspected, or at least the administration Trump certainly is blaming Iran for that. But his red line is that no American service member or an American personnel has to be killed in order for him to react in the way that he would like. And actually, that's what John Bolton's rhetoric was back in May when this whole strategy was first enacted. And so that all led to that rocket attack in Kirkuk, which was likely carried out by ISIS, led to Trump bombing Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq and Syria, killing 25 people and wounding about 51 more, and then the protests at the embassy and the assassination of Soleimani, who, interestingly enough, was on a diplomatic mission to deliver a response from Iran to Saudi Arabia, who was making peace overtures at the time because they didn't look like Trump was going to attack Iran at that point. And so I guess Pompeo, Gareth Porter says in the piece, had been on the phone with Netanyahu in the week, like 3 times on the week leading up to in between those bombings of Kataib Hezbollah and then the protests, and then culminating with the assassination of Soleimani. But that completely evaporated any chances of peace being made with Iraq as the mediator between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Just a interesting little note that I picked up in the past day or so. Iraq has issued an arrest warrant for Donald Trump for the assassination of Soleimani. And so,
Really?
yeah, well, I mean, I don't think it really is going to account for anything. I don't think Trump will ever travel to Iraq, or that Iraq would try to arrest a former president, even if he did. But just an interesting little thing to think about. Maybe we have an extradition trial for Trump on the Soleimani assassination or something. You know, people keep calling for Trump to go to jail. You know, the real reason that Trump needs to be in jail is for his war crimes, not for, you know, encouraging the protests or whatever the hell other things that people are, you know, saying he should be in jail for. So just an interesting
not
little
arming
thing
Nazis
I picked up.
fast enough.
Yeah. All right. So what else do we have on this?
Well, so I just wanted to point out especially that so the key point in that Gareth Porter piece is that in March of 2019 he started putting out statements that Iran was planning attacks. He wasn't presenting evidence, but he was saying that they're planning attacks. I've seen, and it's very similar rhetoric to what we're seeing now. He's saying, I'm seeing escalatory indications, troubling indicators that show that Iran is planning attacks. And then in the next day, after he said that, the Wall Street Journal puts out a piece citing anonymous sources, of course, with intelligence that we can't see, that shows that Iran is planning attacks using their drones in the Persian Gulf, using probably their proxies, as they refer to as the Houthis, which is a false claim, in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and attacks on American assets and Americans maybe in Iraq and in Syria. And so so what essentially all that campaign, the idea was to try and get Trump to sign on to these contingency plans for a war with Iran that included even sending 120,000 troops to the region. And Trump resisted that, apparently, and he said basically that Pompeo and Bolton were trying to push him into a war. And so when the drone was shot down over the Strait of Hormuz, a U.S. drone was shot down by Iran, he resisted the calls to war because he said, look, no American has been killed. I'm not escalating on that basis. And that's when Netanyahu stepped in and really started bombing Iranian allies, or in Iraq, or we see the similar thing. Like last night, for instance, even with everything going on, Israel was bombing just outside the capital of Damascus. They've done so 3 times in the last 10 days. They bomb Syria on a weekly basis, but it's really stepped up in the last several months. And I think, or last few months, and again, they're really trying to pick up some sort of a reaction, because the Iranians and the Israelis and the Americans continue to say that Iran is planning attacks. They want to avenge Soleimani's assassination and also retaliate for Israel's likely assassination with the MEK of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. They've taken credit for it unofficially in like various media outlets. But of course, the Iranians are telling the Iraqis and their allies elsewhere, or their allies in Iraq and elsewhere, to not fire on U.S. forces. And in fact, that was known back in 2019. There was NSA intercepts that were showing that the IRGC was saying just that to their Iraqi allies. And the Iraqi militias who were sending rockets near the embassy and near military bases even back then were deliberately not hitting U.S. personnel. So they waited until the rocket attack in Kirkuk. So I think what's happening now is very similar. They're putting out a red line, just like Obama used to do in Syria, and they hope that somebody makes a move so that they can use that as a casus belli. And what's happening now, the main point about all the escalations that have been going on and what Biden is stepping into during this transition, he would like to get back in, ostensibly would like to get back into the JCPOA. Which would be great. If he lifts sanctions on Iran, Iran said they would return to compliance within an hour. They've violated the deal to gain leverage for sanctions relief, in the hopes of sanctions relief. But that's their right under Articles 26 and 36 of the deal. And of course, the U.S. abrogated itself from the deal in 2018. And the Europeans have not provided sanctions relief. I think Zarif made a comment when the Europeans were, just like they did the other day, complaining about Iran and sort of criticizing them for doing so, for violating the deal and increasing uranium enrichment or increasing their stockpiles of low enriched uranium. They'll say things like, Zarif said, look, you're not following the deal either. There's not one European business in Iran. No European countries are buying oil from Iran, and our money is still frozen up in your banking system. So, I understand what the Iranians are trying to do, and it's all part of their civilian program. One of the main things that's really being used to in the escalatory rhetoric is they keep referring to, for instance, Netanyahu is saying even just the fact that they're increasing uranium enrichment to 20% is proof that they're trying to get nuclear weapons, which of course Israel has, and Iran has never. The Ayatollahs have forbidden that, even when weapons of mass destruction were used against them by the Iraqis in the Iran-Iraq War when they were given to them by the U.S., supplied by the U.S. And so But the 20% enriched uranium, that's used for the Tehran research reactor, which was built by the U.S. in '67 when the Shah, the U.S. installed dictator, was controlling Iran. And it requires 20% enriched uranium to run. And they use that to produce medical isotopes. And they use that for nuclear medicine and, advanced medical imagery and radiation therapy. And it's it's helping boost their domestic industry, as has been pointed out by Dave DeCamp, and it's a way for them to gain leverage. And but in the meantime, you've got I mean, I don't know how much Trump is involved in this after that Daily Beast article, but you and I can just rattle off all the different moves by the military at this point that are just, I mean, they are really stepping up the presence there.
So I guess with what we've seen, that the U.S. deep state military with their allies in Israel and the rest of the military industrial complex will do to keep the U.S. in a confrontational, on the brink of war stance with Iran. What chance does I keep calling it the Biden administration have?
I always call them the Bush administration by accident.
Right. So there you go. What chance does the Biden administration have to really develop a better Iran policy? Do you want to skip ahead to the Jade Sullivan video and then maybe talk about that from there?
Well, sure. I'll just say really quick that Netanyahu has said several times that they will not they will not allow us to return to the deal. Essentially, in fact, let's see. He goes, there must be no return to the previous nuclear agreement. He said, we must stick to an uncompromising policy to ensure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons. And dovetailing with the Jake Sullivan piece, or the video of him on CNN, they're saying, the Saudi foreign minister has said that they would like to be involved in negotiations, which I believe Iran has said already that they would enter into regional negotiations, but it's not going to be like this where the U.S. is running the show. They have no interest in that, and I can see why. But the Saudis, of course, as we said previously, anybody who's a hawk who wants, so-called follow-on negotiations or a better deal, they want to be able to lock down not only the nuclear program, which is a civilian program, of course, but they want to be able to, I mean, I don't know what extent they would do this, but really severely limit the Iranian ballistic missile program, which is their primary deterrence, and also they want them to essentially end their independence, their independent foreign policy, supporting their allies in the Middle East. And so that's definitely not going to be something that Iran is going to get on board with. At least, I mean, I don't know what they may negotiate after sanctions relief and a return to the deal, but if that's going to be contingent on these demands, then I don't know. But we should check out that video for sure, because Jake Sullivan is ramping it up.
Right. Well, yeah, that is one of the things that we have to deal with and emphasize, is that the demands the U.S. is placing on Iran are just ridiculous. I mean, it's just short of asking them to let, putting the Ayatollah in the Stats and having everybody throw tomatoes at them or something. They really want the Iranians to just capitulate. But we'll hear Jade Sullivan. And this is Biden's, what do you remember?
National Security Advisor, I believe.
That's right.
And he's on CNN talking to Fareed Zakaria, who recently said that Russia hacked his brain.
In particular, the issue that most people seem
he hacked Russia has hacked our brain,
about is Iran's ballistic missile capability. That is what the Israelis, for example, are most exercised about. And it strikes me that would be the hardest one, because the Iranians view that as an existential defense. They have memories of the Iran-Iraq War, 8 years during which they suffered from a rain of ballistic missiles. Do you think that you could get a ballistic missile deal with Iran?
Well, first, just
to set the groundwork here, President-elect Biden has said that if Iran comes back into compliance with its terms under the nuclear deal, that is to say, it reduces its stockpile, it takes down some of its centrifuges and other measures so that its program is back in a box, then we would come back in. But that would become the basis for this follow-on negotiation. To your question directly about ballistic missiles, our view is that ballistic missiles and Iran's ballistic missile program has to be on the table as part of that follow-on negotiation. We also believe that there can be conversations that go beyond just the permanent 5 members of the Security Council, the P5+1, and that involve regional players as well. And that in that broader negotiation, we can ultimately secure limits on Iran's ballistic missile technology, and that is what we intend to try to pursue through diplomacy that involves both the direct nuclear file and a broader set of regional issues.
All right, so that was Jay Tapper. Where are you thinking? Can Biden get
Jake
back
Sullivan.
in the Jake Sullivan? Yeah. Sorry, they're all the same. But what are the chances that Biden gets back in the nuclear deal?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I think my default assumption is that these guys are all liars and can be rolled very easily. I mean, even look, I mean, I think Trump in many ways has proven that that there is so much institutional resistance to anybody who wants to even rein in the slightest the U.S. empire, and particularly its escalations and dominance over its most hated enemies or its most targeted enemies, Iran being very high up on that list. So, Joe Biden is Israel's man in Washington. He's been known that as such for decades. And, he's an apartheid enthusiast, and he loves Benjamin Netanyahu. So even though Benjamin Netanyahu has, humiliated him a few times by announcing new settlements as Biden was arriving in Israel to meet with him, and I guess so this vice president, they're on like Air Force 2 or something. Is that the case? Because he stayed on the plane and let his dinner get cold as a show of mild, pathetic protest. But I mean, this guy is going to get rolled. I mean, the idea with Yemen, as we were discussing earlier, was the idea people wondered and speculated, can Biden get by the Saudi lobby? Well, maybe. I don't know. I don't think the Saudi lobby is – I'm not sure who's more – I mean, I would imagine the Israel lobby is probably more powerful, and particularly over somebody like Biden, who is
more of an establishment figure.
Yeah, he's a huge, Israeli partisan, and they are. I just look. I mean, the idea for getting back into the JCPOA would be great, but all he needs to do is lift sanctions. The Iranians will return to compliance, and we should get. We can talk about what's been going on as far as everything around Iran, but right now, I mean, I would get the Nimitz out of there. I mean, so Christopher Miller, the new acting secretary, was going to take. So we've had a carrier group there for about, I think, maybe a month now. But yeah, it's certainly because I wrote a piece on December 6th called "Is Trump Going to War with Iran?" And there had already, and I cited a piece from Pat Buchanan who was discussing that at the time. It was a recent piece, so it's been there for I think about a month. I think it's on some sort of a 10-month deployment. It was going to come elsewhere, and it was going to come home. Miller had ordered it out of the Persian Gulf, and Frank McKenzie, the general running CENTCOM, resisted that. Said no, it's imperative for national security. And a few days after the order was given by Miller, or what the ostensible order, Trump, commanded him, no, you keep that aircraft, you keep that carrier group there. So the Nimitz is staying, and I believe it was some such defense official said to CNN that the Miller's policy was never official in the first place. And beyond that, we've got I think it's called the USS Georgia. It's an Ohio-class nuclear-powered submarine, accompanied by 2 warships in the Persian Gulf. Israel has a nuclear-equipped sub in the Suez Canal, and the IDF, I believe the IDF spokesman came out and said, "We have subs everywhere. They're sailing quietly everywhere," I believe was the quote. Beyond that, we've had three different deployments of B-52s to the Persian Gulf near Iran's coast. We were talking about MBS announcing the other day that he was rekindling his relationship with and reopening relations along with Egypt and I believe Bahrain and the UAE with Qatar. Or rather, Bahrain, Egypt, and Saudi are getting back to after their 3.5-year blockade isolation of Qatar. They're working together now again to combat Iran, to combat regional threats posed by Iran. And now, what's interesting about that is, so there were, like I said, there were 3 deployments of B-52s. The first one was in like late November, and then the second one was like I think on December 9th or 10th of last month. And well, the second deployment, the U.S. B-52s, these long-range bombers were accompanied by aircraft from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Qatar. And so I think there was already an indication that something was going on. You know, I mean, you got Israeli subs, in the Persian Gulf. You've got planes with Saudi planes and Bahraini and Qatari planes flying with US B-52s. We have F-16s moved from a base in Germany to the UAE. We've sent since October. Trita Parsi wrote a great piece called for Responsible Statecraft, the Quincy Institute's outlet, called Iran Attack May Be Next in Trump's Farewell Bag of Tricks. He summarizes all this pretty good, the latest escalations. And he mentions that since October, we've sent like 2,000 more troops to Saudi Arabia and a new squadron of fighter planes there. And here's another thing about Biden and the chances of him getting back into the nuclear deal, let alone maybe he'll even walk into a war on his first day that's already started because they found their casus belli. But have you heard anything on this? Trita Parsi, anything changing? Trita Parsi says that the Biden administration can't get in touch with they're not allowed to talk to the defense agencies. And this has been international. This has gained international attention. He points out that Tobias Ellwood, this conservative British MP, chair of the House of Commons Defense Select Committee, is on Twitter saying basically that if Biden is being prevented from getting in his administration is from being a part of these intelligence briefings, he goes, it might be because Trump has a couple of significant operations up his sleeve, which will get the green light before January 20th. And then the former prime minister of Sweden, this guy Carl Bildt, said he found Trump's conduct strange, and he asked if there had been recent changes to planned or possible imminent operations. So, and also there's reports coming out of Israeli media and Arab media suggesting that, saying that the Israelis and the Saudis are encouraging Trump to strike. They said strike Iran, the nuclear program, likely. That means the Natanz uranium enrichment facility. That's their main center for uranium enrichment and building centrifuges. And they've moved it further underground, renovating it since the Israeli sabotage and terrorism over the summer. Set a large fire to it and damaged quite a few centrifuges. I mean, it's looking like like I said, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen, but it looks like Trump on his way out, maybe he's approved of the tripwire strategy that was deployed against him, or at least against his reelection interests before. Because I think actually, much like he wanted to probably to make he just did a horrible job of it and let himself get rolled and sabotaged and thwarted. But I think he probably wanted for his own political gains, even if he went about it in the entirely wrong way with the maximum pressure campaign and withdrawing from the JCPOA and everything else, he probably would have liked to have it on his resume that he made a deal with Iran that wasn't Obama's deal. And, But that's out the window now.
I definitely agree. I think that if Donald Trump would have negotiated the JCPOA, he would have called it the greatest deal in history. And
Sure.
in a lot of ways, it was, like, from the American side, a pretty good deal. We gave back the Iranians some money that we owed them, that we had stolen from them a long time ago. And in exchange, they kneecapped their nuclear program. I mean, that sounded like, again, if it was Donald Trump who had negotiated that, he would have been like, I got those Persians to tape at their own money, and they turned off their reactor in exchange, and like that would have been his deal. I think he knew very little about the nuclear deal other than Obama did it and the pictures of the pile of cash and whatever the hell else Sean Hannity said about it.
Exactly.
And it's unfortunate because the deal was actually, I think, so favorable, especially in the upfront sense where Iran gave everything up front, that there really wasn't anywhere else to negotiate. And so Trump ended up in a position where he couldn't negotiate with the Iranians, even if he did want to have a deal with them, because he blew a perfect deal, at least from the American standpoint, So I'm not sure where he could go. And I think Biden's in somewhat of the same pickle, that the US and Iran had a really good deal and Trump absolutely destroyed it. And so that means Biden needs to undo everything that Trump has done, or the Iranians won't re-enter. And that just seems like such a huge hurdle.
With all the sanctions from Elliott Abrams, especially in the last several months on every week. Yeah, he literally has said, I don't think Biden will be able to re-enter the deal.
Right.
And, that's it. He's gloating about it. It's
and while the Democrats control Congress, I mean, I could imagine the Republicans acting in much the same way the Democrats did after Trump got elected. And anytime he tried to roll back Obama's sanctions on Russia, they did everything they could in Congress to block it. They threw an absolute fit every time he did anything. Oh, he's a sock puppet of Putin. They'll be calling Biden the sock puppet of the Ayatollah. Look, mushy brain Biden is getting taken advantage of. Oh, he's so stupid. He can't negotiate like with the Persians like our great Donald Trump could. And there's going to, politically, I think the forces are going to work against Biden re-entering the JCPOA. And honestly, I don't think that, seeing the people he surrounded himself by, including Jake Sullivan, but other people as well, I don't think, and this is really unfortunate, I would hope he would, but I don't think we'll be re-entering the deal.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, from after what I've seen of, another point that's interesting about all this is, these are going to be some very interesting first few months of Biden's presidency. If you review what happened with Trump came in and everybody thought he was a wild card, right? Well, speaking of people getting shot in the neck, remember, he killed Anwar al-Awlaki's daughter. Obama killed Anwar al-Awlaki and his son. These are all American citizens. But I think not much longer than a week in office, Trump, this is it's an unconstitutional war. I know it's quasi-legal because of the AUMF against al-Qaeda and their associates. But of course, even that war in Yemen, the anti-AQAP war, is technically unconstitutional. So, but anyway, he goes in there and he does a raid in this, like I said, this illegal war, kills an American citizen, shoots an 8-year-old the special forces shoot a little 8-year-old girl in her neck. She bleeds out. So he immediately, upon entering office, was like, at the time, I mean, this is just a metaphor, of course. I'm not literally saying this is what happened, but it's like he was jumped into a gang initiation. Like, hey, you got blood on your hands now. And, a month later, he's sending U.S. Tanks and troops to Estonia as a part of a NATO drill on Russia's borders called Atlantic Resolve. And in March, he went and met with the Saudis, and the rest is history. We were just talking about it. So it's like, we'll have to see, because they move fast. And as we can see, there's, especially with everything going on a range of issues, like you were saying about what'll happen to Biden once he gets in office. Yeah, I use the phrase red baiting a lot, even though it's not a direct it's not directly applicable. It's not like they're calling Biden a communist. A lot of people are calling him a Chinese communist, and a lot of some of the. I bet you if you talk to a lot of people at the Capitol yesterday, a lot of them would say that. Alex Jones was saying just that at a big Stop the Steal thing, I think, there just a few days ago, and they're going there. This is the strategy. I mean, it's constantly. It's like what they were doing to Trump, his entire administration. They're not calling him a communist, but they're saying he's in the bag with Russia, and Biden's going to be in the bag for China, and they're getting manipulated by these geniuses like these manipulative, powerful, criminal masterminds like the Ayatollah and Kim Jong-un, and it's just the most ridiculous funhouse vision of how the world works. The American empire runs the world, and it's trying to submerge the last few countries that have been recalcitrant, and they are, they're willing to do up to just about anything. I mean, if anything, like this tripwire strategy, if things go badly, and I think the Israelis are just, actually, Javad Zarif has said that he has he's the foreign minister for Iran. He has said in the last, I guess, week, maybe, or week or two, that he's discovered they've discovered Iraqi intelligence that shows that not only is America fabricating what he called pretext for a war with Iran, but he said, the quote is, let's see if I have it here. Anyway, he said, he goes, this is what he said on Twitter. New intelligence from Iraq indicate that Israeli agent provocateurs are plotting attacks against Americans, putting an outgoing Trump in a bind with a fake casus belli. Be careful of a trap at real Donald Trump. Any fireworks will backfire badly, particularly against your same BFFs. Now, he's, of course, the Iranians, they're totally the underdog, and I mean, I think the war with Iran might destroy the American economy, be the thing that puts it over the edge, like Ron Paul has always talked about the empire finally driving off a cliff, and we'll come home not necessarily because Ron Paul had convinced everybody that, of course, non-interventionism is the correct policy, but because we won't be able to afford it anymore. And this isn't, killing 1 million people in Iraq after you've starved and sanctioned and bombed them for 10 years under the Clinton administration, and you go in there and just obliterate the place. This is and even that was a horrible, horrible disaster and a protracted war, and imposed huge costs on the U.S. A war with Iran, that's 80 million people. That's 4 times the size of Iraq rather. And it's a totally different situation, especially with the asymmetrical capabilities of the United States, or rather of Iran. And actually, what's it's not funny, but what's so ironic about this is Trump keeps saying, the Daily Beast report said, when he handed over policy to Pompeo, Gina Haspel, the torturer, the head of the CIA, and Elliot Abrams, the arch neocon, he hands them the policy. And he goes, just don't start World War III. I don't want to do anything that would get an American soldier killed. I'm happy to back these Israeli kind of cloak and dagger covert ops, like killing Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, the Iranian scientist. But it's contradictory, because of course, if Iran is attacked, they will immediately fire on U.S. forces stationed in Qatar, in Bahrain, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. Saudi Arabia. So he doesn't want an American to get killed, right? But if one does, he'll go to war with a country of 80 million people. And if you want to take over a country like that, if you want to do regime change, they can fantasize about the air war being all you need. You're going to have to put troops on the ground. And immediately, like we said, that's why the ballistic missiles, all Iran's enemies know that they will get hit when something like that kicks off. So he's full of because he doesn't want one to get killed. Maybe he doesn't because I don't know why. Maybe he really believes in all the Fox News nonsense about the troops, but he definitely would end up sacrificing a lot of troops for that war in Iran, and so that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great place to wrap. After everything, I still think probably the regime change in Iran is more likely than here in the U.S. Any coups going on. Still keep an eye on Iran, even under the Biden administration. So, Connor, tell people where they can find your work, and then we'll get out of here.
Hey, I write for the Libertarian Institute. Working with you and Scott Horton and Pete Quinones and that great team over there. And I recommend everybody go to that site every day. And I'm on Twitter at Freeman's Mind 96.
All right.
I say some ridiculous things on there sometimes, but I'm usually right.
All right. The show's at the Libertarian Institute and on YouTube. Subscribe to the show there. Conflicts of interest. Like it. Subscribe, especially if you're still listening. You must have enjoyed the conversation. We'll have plenty more like this. And I'll be back with another show next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Kyle. Appreciate it.